Thank you everyone for joining us for the Language Lessons for a Living Education webinar. We are so glad that you've been with us for all of the sessions up until this one, and this one is live. So we're very glad to take your questions with our authors of this series. And with me today, I have Kristen, Rachel, and Sarah. So thank you for being here. If you want to do a really quick little introduction of yourself, we'll take the questions and get started. So we'll start with Kristen, then Rachel, and then Sarah.
Well, hello, everyone. I am so excited that you're here. We cannot wait to answer your questions. So I'm Kristen Pratt. I'm the VP of Education here at Masterbooks, and I am also the author of the Language Lessons for a Living Education series. But I didn't write them all by myself. I have two wonderful co-writers that have poured their hearts into the series as well, and I can't wait for you to hear from them.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is a new perspective for me to be on a live with you guys because usually I'm on the other side, being one of the ones answering the questions and hosting and things. So I'm excited to get to do this portion, but I do work with Masterbooks with customer service, and I'm the co-author of levels 7 and 8. And as many of you know, I'm a mom of 4, homeschool mom of 4, 3 graduates, 1 high school senior, and just excited to be doing it from this perspective today.
Hello, I'm Sarah. Also happy to be with you guys today. Co-author of the high school levels, and really excited that Kristen handed me that baton because we're about to cross the finish line with level 12 coming out really soon. So it's kind of a cool feeling to see the whole series wrap up and see all those pretty colors in the stack of books together. So very excited about that.
Thank you, everyone. And I always forget to introduce myself. My name is Caitlin. I'm one of the Masterbooks coaches, and so glad to be able to join you ladies live today as we discuss all about language lessons and take questions live. So it's kind of a fun event because we don't always know the questions that are coming, and we get to process right on the spot and try to think of our best response in the moment. So that's the fun part of these lives. So let's go ahead and start with a question that I think I will direct toward Kristen. It is a question that comes in pretty frequently in our communities, and it has to do with sentence diagramming. And the question is asking if sentence diagramming is included, why or why not, and the reason behind that decision.
Nope, it is not included. There are some students that absolutely love diagramming and some students that absolutely hate it. And then there's students all in between. But it really isn't necessary to learn diagramming to understand all of the grammar concepts that are taught within language lessons. And I am not a huge fan of diagramming personally. And so I didn't include it in there. Now, that doesn't mean I'm against diagramming. It's just for me to have to create diagramming lessons would have been, just very difficult. And so what I've always planned on is for someone who loves diagramming to create a little extra workbook of all diagramming. Now, I do have a son that just loves to diagram sentences. That was his favorite part of language arts when he was homeschooling. But I don't think he'll write that book for me, even though he loved it. So as soon as we have the right person and it's the right time, we will probably have some diagramming workbooks for families who really love to dive into that because they are like a puzzle. And I can understand how for some students it really clicks. But there's enough students that's just extra work for them to do that I didn't include it as part of it. Because if it was really essential, I would have either created them, even if I didn't enjoy it, or I would have found someone to do it for me. So I did opt to leave them off with the hopes of making these practice books available at some point.
Yeah, and Practice Makes Polished is being written and is coming out for the elementary levels now. So that's already providing a lot of extra practice. And I know as a mom who uses the series myself, even in the application, we are seeing, oh, this is how you label that subject, that verb, put the Prepositional phrase. Sorry. My children have stolen all of my vocabulary and my brain. So sometimes my recall on words is slow. So that's the issue with going live is you get the real me here. Anyway, prepositional phrases, you have to put those in parentheses. And so in a different perspective, you are labeling and utilizing those parts of speech and you're seeing how they work together in a sentence. So as a mom, I do see that my kids are applying not only learning what those parts of speech are, but also where they see them in a sentence and how they see them behave in a sentence. So I do see that as a part of it. And I was one of those people that just was so proud to go up to the whiteboard and label everything and do the diagramming and to hear my teacher tell me what a great job I did. So maybe I'm one of those silly people that likes this stuff, but it's just fun to see how all the puzzle pieces work together. So thank you for answering that question. Let's do a question that's geared toward middle school. How do you feel that levels 7 and 8 transition students from those elementary years into the high school years? Would you view the level 7 and 8 as a bridge? I think I'll direct that one toward Rachel if I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, they're definitely a bridge from elementary to high school. They were written with that as purposefully. At the time, I would levels 1 through 6. I was able to look through those. I'd use those personally in my home with my own youngest child. So I was very familiar with levels 1 through 6 and what was covered there. And then Sarah was finishing level 9 as well. And so I had a good view of what level 9 was going to include. And so I kept that in mind. I knew what was covered 1 through 6, what was coming in level 9, and made sure to bridge that gap, especially focusing on the writing and what would be required in the writing there. So absolutely, it's a very good bridge from elementary to high school. Students are not going to struggle. They're not going to see obviously there's changes, but there's not going to be anything drastic that's going to be overwhelming to them coming from level 6 to level 7. And then the same thing from level 8 to 9. They're going to notice a definite difference, but nothing that's going to be a drastic, overwhelming change.
Thank you. And while we're on the topic of middle school, would you and Sarah be able to talk a little bit about what is different at level 7 and up all the way through level 12 when it comes to those review sections? I know those are a little different with where the answers are located, as well as maybe how they're handled as with other levels. So if you want to talk about the middle school levels real quick, Rachel, and then we'll go into with Sarah about those review pages and where those answer keys are located and the thought behind that.
Yeah, so many people want some type of assessment at the end of every week. And so these review pages are great for that. The review page is going to be on day 5 each week. It's going to cover a little bit from everything that's been taught throughout that lesson. So I say week, but maybe you're not doing it Monday through Friday, and that's fine. So we'll say lesson. So day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, there's going to be a little bit of something from all of those on that review page. We are frequently asked about the answer key for those review pages. And so with that assessment in mind, that answer key is included, but in a separate location. So you'll look in the back of the textbook, you see where the regular answer key is, but maybe you're looking for day 5 and you're frustrated. Where's day 5? I want the answers for day 5. We do have the answers included as well. They're just in a separate section. I have that marked in my book here of level 7. So on page 449, this is the beginning of our, getting the camera properly. This is always my problem with going live. You see, it explains what's included in the answer key actually on this page 449 in level 7. And it tells you there's an assessment explanation, exercise answer key, and then review answer key. So in the back, after the regular answer key, we now have the review answer key, and it actually says that at the top of the page here. It says review answer key. So all of the day 5 answer keys are in a separate location, and it'll be day 5, day 10, day 15. So it's very easy to follow. I personally love that as a mom because I am one of the ones that likes to tear out the answer key and keep it separate from my students as the quiz and test answer key. So I want to tear out that as a quiz and keep it in a separate location, but I want my student to have access to the regular answer key on a daily basis. So for me, this is a great setup because I'm not having to separate that quiz. If it were just done in line day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, I would have to somehow hide that day 5 or not let my student have access to the answer key because I wouldn't want them to cheat on day 5.
That's very good. We don't want them to cheat any day, but that's so perfect.
No.
Sarah, what would you say as that relates toward the high school levels with that review day and where that answer key is located and how a family might practically utilize that in the high school levels?
Yeah, so as Rachel said, the keys are separated, and yeah, we get that question often, but I think customers are getting used to the separate answer key. I think it's really functional. I would add that the review days, even if you're not really the type to care that much about having an assessment or something to grade, this is just another opportunity for the student to interact with the material. It's reinforcement, it's more practice. And so I know some people tend to want to skip them, it's not new information, but I think they're really, really important just to really solidify the concepts where the student can work on those again. So I wouldn't recommend skipping them. I think they're a great tool for review and for assessment. Also in the higher levels, there's some features like review it is something I add in, especially for grammar and for the communication days. So there's a little bit more review built into the high school levels in addition to the day 5 review days.
Perfect. Okay, so one of the questions that's come through today in our live says, one thing that holds me back from making the switch to language lessons is that I would like a literature component. Is there a plan to create a companion elementary literature curriculum? So we'll direct that one toward Kristen, and we can talk a little bit about the approach with reading and those kinds of things.
Right. Right now, we don't have anything in the works. You never know what might come down the pike. But built into the language lessons for a living education series. So this is the approach from the very young all the way up through high school. I did not want to assign to children what they have to read and how quickly they have to read it, because as a mom of 9 that I've homeschooled all the way on up, they they were so different with their interests, with their abilities, and even with my goals for each student, because they're all fearfully and wonderfully made, and God's purposes and plans are different for each one of my children. So even within the same family, it can be difficult to duplicate that from year to year for each child. So for instance, in 3rd grade, each of my children would not have excelled. They wouldn't have benefited if I used the exact same book and required that they read through it in the exact same time as each other. So, if that's the way that it is within a family, how much more so is it out there with all of these families and all of these children? And so I wanted a program that was very flexible, that allows a mom to tailor the reading to the needs of her student. Now, it could be, you have a student that just loves cats and they will devour anything that's the topic of cats. Now, you may not want to give them every book on cats, but you're certainly going to excite them about reading if you can throw several of those in there each year. And so instead of us assigning exactly what you should be reading with, or your students should be reading, I prefer to allow the parents to do it because it's going to be far more effective and a lot more enjoyable for the student. And when something is enjoyable for the student, it automatically becomes more effective. And so that's our goal. We want students to learn to love to read. And you do that by making sure that the books that you choose are not above their level, they're not too far below their level, they're interesting to the student, and you can select a combination of easier books all the way up to a little bit more to stretch them a little bit. But as a homeschool mom, you know your student and you can test that out. You can read from a book and find out, wow, they just aced that. It's time to move up a little bit. And so you can gauge that. And again, you know your students' interests, and you also know how much time, week to week, day to day, even month to month, that your student has to devote to reading. So if I set that pace, even beyond just a student's ability with how fast they can read, you also have seasons of life. So maybe at your church over the holiday season, they're practicing to put on a production at church. And so, a lot of their time is being spent on that, and they have less time for reading. And so you can pull back on that, where if I'm just assigning everything and your student is expected to do it, you don't have that kind of flexibility. And so that's also going to really impact your students' desire to read, because if they feel really stressed because they have all these books that they have to read that's assigned, and life has just gotten busy, you just don't have as much flexibility to pull that back. And so there's a lot of reasons that go into why we don't have that built into the language lessons. We do have reading prompts, and we do have a sheet in the back of the book where you can plan out what books you want your student to read, and you can also use it as a checklist. And in the upper levels, they actually get to even rate the book. And so Sarah came up with that idea, and I thought it was a really good one, and I'd like to apply it at some point to all of the levels. But to me, it's just more effective for the goals of creating lifelong learners, and for students to learn to enjoy reading without that pressure, and being able to have the flexibility of what they're interested in and setting the pace. So you may have a student that just devours books and you can hardly keep up. But then you have another student that may read, that same book instead of a day. You may need to spread it out over a week or a month. And that's why we just put in those reminders, and we give the resource in the back of the book. So it's not something that's just extra thrown in. It's actually built in to the approach of the entire series. So it shouldn't be, oh, I have to supplement. No, you're not supplementing. This is actually the approach. It's what's built in, which is why we give those reminders to assign books to your student.
Absolutely. And that's really one of the best parts about the approach of homeschooling is that we meet our student where they are. And I think we often forget what they're receiving is actually a customized education. Each one of our children, like you said, is fearfully and wonderfully made. So we are their mom and we're still getting to know them. When they're born, we're like, who are you? And what are you going to be like? And then you have another one and you're like, whoa. And that's kind of how it is with homeschooling. Even as they get older, it's easier to look back and be like, there you were. You were that same way when you were 1 year old. You did the same thing and you're still doing it today, whether that's banging your head on the table or, the wall or whatever their mannerisms are, But it's just really cool to remember that we know our kids. We're still getting to know them better and better, and we can give them that customized education. So that is something to celebrate and lean into, as opposed to feeling like they're not getting something. They're actually getting so much more with this approach. And I love that you have designed it to be that way. So as we were talking about reading, there is a question that has come through, and it really has a lot to do with some of those same themes. Maybe it's a theme of confidence or not knowing what to do or when to move on. It's kind of centered on those learning to read years with that level 1, and how phonics are introduced with level 1. And the question is, are these lessons for phonics being introduced in a shorter time period? Are they just for exposure to learn the sounds? Or do students need to truly know them before they can move on from week to week? So example would be, do they need to master that PH says the F sound, or before they move on to GH says G, or it's silent, or it says whatever. So that's kind of the question there. Are students expected to master those blends in language lessons level 1 before they move on? Or is there a different thought that you would share with them at that learning to read level?
I would definitely focus on mastery of the phonics sounds. I wouldn't on the spelling. The spelling is just introductory. That they're not expected to master that. They're not expected to master the grammar that's in there, but the reading really is the focus. And so it really depends on the student. If they're really, really struggling, I wouldn't move on. I would make sure that you drill down, you practice, and I would add a variety of ways. Look for it in other reading books that you have. Add ways, hands-on activities to practice those sounds. But if the student is mainly getting it, but they forget from time to time, then I would say it's okay to continue to move on, but I would go back and review periodically. So, and again, the program is flexible, and so some of the answer requires some more questions. So are you doing foundations phonics and level 1 in kindergarten as a combined, or did you start off with foundations phonics in kindergarten and then you're doing level 1 in first grade? Are you doing both in first grade? Some of that is a pacing issue. So, you really have to drill down in to see the individual application and what's going on with the student to be able to fully assess what's going on. But definitely you want to focus on the reading concepts in foundations phonics and level 1. And so that is the part that you want mastery of, even if you have to do a little bit of spiral along with the mastery.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, as students are learning to read, they will do that at various ages and stages and levels. And language lessons 1 does have an alternate schedule. So if it's beneficial to those families, they can spread that out a little bit. And even if you find leveled readers at your child's level, you can identify those letter blends in those books that you're reading and say, hey, look what I found. There's the EA. What does that say? And how does that say that in this particular word in this sentence? So there's a lot of creative fun that you can do to make out of it, where it's like we're on a hunt as we read, as we go throughout life, as we're driving around and we're sitting at a stop sign or whatever. What do we see around us? So we can pull in those real life lessons there to give our children more exposure beyond just what's in the curriculum itself, to see what's going on around them and where they can identify those things, which will only strengthen the lessons that they're experiencing. So
Absolutely.
we'll jump from level 1 all the way up to high school. We'll do a high school question just to keep it fresh for everybody. So this question is a little bit longer, but I think the heart of the question is really asking about pacing and using a lower level for those higher grades in high school. So I'll go ahead with the question. That they've been using another curriculum that is less structured when it comes to composition. Written narrations would turn into essays. That has not worked for them because they're not equipped to make that actually happen. The student is a junior and the parent isn't getting enough written work from the student. And so they don't really know what to teach. The student is solid on grammar and spelling, capable of multiple paragraphs, just not inclined to come up with something to write. And the student is male, if that makes a difference. The question is, how to finish out high school with maybe a year and a half or so to go. Last week, they just started level 8 because they weren't sure about level 9. Could they jump in there? So they're comfortable graduating using level 9 in that final senior year, but they're kind of wondering how to pace this out. Can they get through 2 of those books, levels 8 and 9, in under 2 years? In 3 semesters, something like that. How could they accomplish that, whether that be skipping some lessons or doubling up? How would you answer that long question that I know is very specific to that situation, but it really speaks to a situation that a lot of parents might find themselves in, where they're dealing with a student who's at an older grade trying to fit in. How do we fit in these skills with whatever lower level of language lessons that they're using? Sarah, what advice would you give to a parent that's doing their best trying to figure this out and make it work for their maybe their junior or senior's high school transcript, navigating those years?
Yeah, first of all, as we always say, check with your state laws and everything that you need to graduate that student, what's required. Also, are they on a track for college? Is college a plan that they have? That kind of factors in as well. But as we always say, the curriculum is a tool, right? So if he's on level 8 right now and next year's his senior year, I can just give advice based on what I would do if it was my son. And I have 5 sons, so I know how boys tend to view language arts. It's a little bit different. Using level 8, I think she said that his grammar was pretty on track. But the writing skills, being able, he can write a solid paragraph. If by the end of this school year, he is writing decent paragraphs and able to write a short essay, he may be ready to jump into 9 next year. You could also use the summer. I did summer school one year, work through the summer and try and get through level 8, pick and choose. If he's solid on grammar, maybe be skipping some of the grammar. You can also use the review days. So say you put him in level 9 for next year, for his senior year. On the review, where it's the grammar review, have him do the grammar review, possibly before he even starts the lesson. If he can do very well on the grammar review section, he may not need to do that grammar lesson. Not something that I would normally suggest, but if you're trying to get through, more quickly, and he's pretty good on grammar. So I would pick and choose. I would look ahead at each lesson and sort of create a lesson plan based on what his needs are. And I think that if you do that, you would be able to get him through by the end of his senior year.
That's a great answer to the question. A little piggyback question off of that is it okay to use a lower level of language lessons and never make it to level 12 in high school? Can a student graduate with level 10 or 11 for their last year of high school?
My high school senior is only getting through 11. And I'm confident in that. I think each level, they're each a full high school credit. Each one of the levels teaches essay writing. It teaches research skills, citation. Level 9 uses the Chicago style. Level 10 uses MLA. Level 11 uses APA. And then in level 12, they'll have an opportunity to use all 3 different styles of citation. So in communication skills, from public speaking, interviews, things like that, are taught at all of the levels. They're each very unique in a way, but they all cover those basics that are needed. So again, just depending on your state laws and your child, I am confident that a student could be prepared for college writing, even only going through level 9, if that's the circumstance you find yourself in.
That's very helpful. Rachel, this question is going to kind of overview some in the elementary years, but also in the middle school years. And the question is, how can a family practically implement the back matter of the book during their lessons? Like, what might that look like? We do say that you need to check out the back of the book. It's so helpful. And we've been getting that message out, and that's great. We need to continue to do that because there's a lot of great stuff back there. But I think the question is like, okay, I'm there. I found it. What do I do with it? How do I use that? So do you have any advice as they go through their lessons, maybe for more of the days 2 through 5? Do you think that may apply a little bit there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me personally, how I use the back matter, especially more in the elementary years and into middle school years, was taking out the grammar sheets for one thing. And I would have those in a separate place. I mean, of course, you can leave them in there, but I wanted my student to have easy access to them and to have them right there in front of them at all times. So we kind of created like a little student language arts binder, and where they would have access to those grammar rules consistently to refresh their memory of things that they studied the weeks before, or even as they're studying and looking at it while doing those exercises, they're able to look there. And then the same thing with the spelling rules. Those were helpful to be able to see those spelling rules and incorporate that while we were doing spelling lessons each week. And then as they get into levels 7 and above, you're going to see even more incorporated of additional exercises and additional activities they could do every day. So as Sarah's already mentioned, review day is for reinforcement. Those activities in the back of the book are another way to give you that reinforcement. So if you have a day and you're like, okay, they just didn't get it. We're talking about mastery here, and we want them to master something. The additional things in the back are going to help reinforce that and to give you mastery. So you're done the day, or maybe they've rushed through it. You're talking through the lesson with them. You don't feel like they really grasped the material. You have additional resources in the back that you can pull out. In the younger years, we have practice makes polished for that coming, and that works for that. But we do still have that back matter in the younger years, and then even more so in the 7th through 12th. That's how I used it on a regular basis in my home. Lots of suggestions for games and activities to review and reinforce back there as well that are a great help on a day-to-day. Really, honestly, for me, it became too being disciplined as mom to remember that it was back there. But pulling it out into the separate little book for my student helped a lot with us accessing it more regularly and seeing it right in front of us regularly. Made a huge difference in how much we actually utilized that.
That's very helpful. So you're telling me that it's not just me who has kids who don't get it some days. It's not just me.
No, not at all.
Oh,
We're still
good.
there.
That's so helpful. I think it can be so easy to feel so isolated sometimes at maybe at our kitchen table or our school table, wherever we're doing school. And if you run into one of those days where they're just not getting it, they're in 8th grade and they can't tell you what a noun is. And you can get a little nervous to be like, oh no, I have failed. It's my fault. We're never going to graduate. It's just so helpful to be encouraged by the masterbooks communities that that does happen. Even grown-ups have to take a minute to do some recall sometimes. And so we have to maybe look a few things up and remember what definitions to things are every once in a while. So it's very encouraging to hear you say that for a student that needs extra review and practice, that those pages are there for them. And it's not anything to be concerned about if they need them. That's why they're there, because that is bound to happen. Kristen, do you have anything that you would want to share regarding the review pages or the practice pages, all of the back matter support with families that are using masterbooks language lessons in any level?
Sure. I specifically put all that back there because I've used a lot of different curriculum before Masterbooks was even available. And, I also owned a company where we sold lots of different types of curriculum. And so I've reviewed and used a lot of different types of curriculum. And with my older kids, oh, how I wish I had language lessons, because if your kid is struggling after they do 5 or 6 of the same type of problem and they're still not able, say, to identify a verb very well, it would be so frustrating for them to have 10 more problems of the same type, and they weren't getting it. They don't get it those first few problems. We need to come at it a different way, from a different angle. And if we can involve more than 1 or 2 senses, all the better. So if you're playing games with them using Simon Says or something like that, it's involving their whole body. They're hearing, they're participating, they're using multiple modes of learning. And what the science has actually shown, that even if we have a dominant way of learning, so I can be very visual, and you'll see I use my hands a lot because I'm seeing things, and I just use my hands. It helps that I'm partly Italian too. But that's a part of who I am and the way that I see the world and interact with the world. But what the science shows is that visual, yeah, is great for me, but so is auditory and physically interacting. That even for someone who what their dominant way of learning is, adding in additional improves their understanding and their retention even more. So by adding in some of these alternative ways to interact with the material, you're helping solidify the concepts, where it's very one-dimensional to continue to just give them more of the same type of problem and expect them to somehow get it because they've done now 15 of these and they've gotten half of them wrong. So, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I found frustration building in my students when we approached it in that way. So that's why I put all the back matter there and tried to change it up. Now, your student, they may catch on to verbs immediately, but adverbs may be a struggle. So why make every student have to do the same exact number of problems and have to do the same games or the same approach? We want to tailor it to the needs of our family. And so that's where that back matter really gives us the tools that we need to make it function the best way possible for our students. And I know Rachel and Sarah, they as your needs are going to change as your student gets older. And so they help to adapt the back matter to meet the needs of students that are maturing and may have different needs.
That's so wonderful. Yeah, it's great that you mentioned that it's functional, but I also heard a word in that word is the word fun. And most of us like to have fun. I know I love fun and I need fun. And, I was always capable of being an A student, but I chose to be a B student because I wanted to have time to have fun. And so, as a homeschooling mom, that's definitely my personality today. Because we're with our kids all the time, we know them so well, like we talked about. We know what's going to maybe get to them in a way that's fun, especially if they're struggling. I know just what to say. I know just what to do. And they're trying so hard not to smile or not to let that laugh come through because they're just determined to be the way that they are. But because we know them so well, we're with them, we can pull out practice makes polished and do the word games and say something silly or read something even wrong, pull the wrong word in there and surprise them. And that can just break it up and help them, because our goal here is not the drudgery and to get through the lesson for the sake of the lesson, but we're here to help them connect the love of learning so that they have these tools that they can take into life to continue learning, even when we're not sitting there with them at the table anymore. So I love that you're meeting them there where real life happens. It's functional, it's fun, it's important, but we also want them to feel like they can do this with confidence, get the information that they need and build on it and continue to move forward. So I really love that you shared all of that about how to use the back matter of language lessons. All right. So we have quite a few more questions because we have so many people that are excited to be here with us today. So let's get through the rest of the questions that we have. We have quite the list. The next question is spelling or vocabulary still included in the upper grades? And the question is for 7th and up. So could you talk a little bit, Rachel, about the difference between elementary spelling and how that transitions a little bit in those middle school levels?
Yes, I can. I will say, Kristen actually incorporated that part of that into level 7 and 8. So I definitely want to let Kristen have some things to say here too. But this is when you're going to see vocabulary coming in as well in level 7 and 8, and then those vocabulary words can be applied to your spelling. But I'm going to actually just kind of toss that because that was really more Kristen overseeing that and that thought process of moving the spelling in the direction it goes in those upper levels.
Right. As students mature, they're really learning higher level vocabulary, and they're getting into higher level reading passages. And so my approach to it was very practical. I wanted to take words that applied to the actual lesson. So instead of grouping the words by, say, specific vowel. That's how spelling worked in the lower levels. Whatever they were working on in their lesson, the spelling words matched it, because application is really, really important. And so Masterbooks really does focus on applying what they're learning. And so that came into play with the spelling words. Well, as a student gets into 7th, 8th grade, and then into high school, they've learned how to spell pretty well for most students. Now, not all students, and we do put in there a way that students that struggle to spell certain words, that they can practice and learn how to spell. But we want it in context. And so that's where moving away from just spelling words into vocabulary matches what the student is doing. And so we're putting these words into context. And many students will be taking these college entry exams. And so we want exposure to a wide variety of vocabulary words. But what better way, for instance, when you get into level 9, they're going to be reading Pilgrim's Progress. Well, our vocabulary words are taken out of Pilgrim's Progress. And so not only are they stretching their vocabulary, but they're doing it within context. So they're going to see these words in what they're reading. And so this is how we practically learn as adults what a word means. What do? We look at the context. Okay, if I don't understand the meaning within the sentence, then let's look at the broader paragraph. That's how we learn. Our first thing isn't to, okay, let's grab our phone and put it in there and look it up. Our first thing is to see what's the context of this word. And so we really transition over from, okay, we're studying the nuts and bolts skills into this contextual learning of words. And it's just a very rich, natural way to transition from the elementary years all the way up into the high school years, where they're going to have to understand the meaning of words in broader contexts and utilize them. We encourage students to actually use them in their conversations. So we want them to apply, not just have head knowledge, but know how to apply it. Now, as parents, we might giggle or even cringe a little bit as our students are starting to use some of these words in everyday conversation. But I would encourage you to just make it fun and don't correct every little thing that they might get wrong. They might have a slight misunderstanding of what a word means when they try to apply it. Just encourage the fact that they're trying to do that. That will all get refined over time. But it's a fun way for students to be able to practice and learn a broader vocabulary that is going to carry them into adulthood more than just being able to pass a college entrance exam. And so, we really want to encourage students to learn things that they're going to carry it forward for the rest of their lives, not just for a test. Now, is it helpful for passing those college entrance exams? Absolutely. But we have a bigger goal in mind. And I just love having the application part of it. I love having the context part of it. And I love them learning and being stretched to understand more and more words that they can use for the rest of their life.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I remember when my children were young and they would mispronounce a word. It was so cute. And so that's what we would call that thing from that point forward. So chocolate was chocolate. Well, that just makes sense. And biscuits was big skit. And so that's what we still call biscuits today because one of our kids said it wrong. And so where along the way do we lose thinking that that's cute? And we get all serious in those middle school and upper high school levels to think that they just have to have it so perfect that, so even in their spelling or in the way that they might use a vocabulary word, let's just continue to have fun with it and, think of it as when they were young because it's still pretty fun and that's part of the fun of homeschooling is we're still learning together. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
It is. And I'd like Sarah to just add some thoughts about the high school level because really from 10th grade on up, my life became very difficult as I was caretaking for my mom. And so I really couldn't do as much of the actual writing. And so I had to pull back and Sarah had to step in more. She was very gracious and kind to do that. And then once she wrote level 10, it was like, well, you've got this. You may as well finish up the series. And so I have provided more of an advisory role with it, where if she's stuck on something, she sends it over and I give feedback. And then, of course, I'm reviewing it all the way through and I'm having discussions with her and our editors and design team. But Sarah really took the vocabulary section and went farther with it for the high school levels.
Yeah, so the vocabulary words are, like Kristen said, not just random lists of words that kids should know, but they're taken from the companion book. So in level 9, it was Pilgrim's Progress. In level 10, it's Life of Washington. Level 11 doesn't have a companion book. So what I chose to do was I took the top 260 words most likely to appear on like an SAT, an ACT, those types of tests, figuring that those were probably good words for students to know moving forward into college and real life. And then in level 12, we're using the Henry Morris commentary, The Remarkable Record of Job. And so the vocab for the first half of the year, because the commentary only goes for the first semester, the second semester, the students are reading the book of Job. And so all of the vocab actually come directly from the book of Job. The other thing that it does is, yes, it gives them the vocabulary word in context, but it really helps their reading comprehension. So if on exercise 1, they're getting very familiar with these vocabulary words, sometimes also the synonyms and antonyms that go with those words, then by the time they're reading that week's reading selection, they have an idea of what that word means, and then they get to see it in context. And now their reading makes a lot more sense to them. So those days really go hand in hand, the worldview days and the exercise 1 with the vocabulary words.
Yeah, that's helpful. Even like we like to know what we're talking about. Even we'll be singing maybe a song in church and it's kind of a funny word. And I'll lean down and say to my kids, do you know what that word means? They're like, no. So, we'll look it up or I'll try to explain it to them, the meaning, what that means. So that way, even in their worship time or their Bible reading or their book reading, wherever they are, if we know what we're talking about and what the word means in context, we're going to get so much more value from what we're trying to learn. And then I think we'll remember it quite a bit more as well. So that's very helpful to hear that from all of the levels as far as it goes with spelling into vocabulary words and all of those meanings. So that's very helpful. If a student is struggling with spelling, the question is, how could a parent support them and help them? And what if spelling is just a continual struggle? Do they move along in week to week to week, or how might a parent support a struggling speller?
I would say for the younger kids, there's a lot of extra practice for spelling in the Practice Makes Polished. And so we have levels 2 and 3 that are available now. I have to get busy and write level 4. That will be coming out within the next few months. And so as we're releasing those levels, that's a really good way to get that extra practice. Now, some students are just better spellers than others. I have kids that I've done the same exact curriculum.
Mhm.
We've had the same exact approach. And one kid spells everything right, and another kid can't spell to save their life. And so it you just say, but we've done everything the same. How can this be? And I've seen it time and time again with 9 children. I have the comparison. I know exactly what curriculum they've used. And, to me, they're just kind of born that way. So I've done all the remediation things. I've studied all sorts of ways and approaches and tried everything with my students that don't spell as well, that it doesn't come naturally, because we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We're so different from each other. God has distinct purposes and plans for all of us. And when we look at the Bible, he uses the most unlikely people very often. So look at Moses, who had issues with speaking, and he's the one sent before Pharaoh to speak. So, we don't have to get really anxious about these things. In fact, the previous owner of Master Books, he struggled with spelling, and he owned a publishing company. So, you're not limited. What I would say is continue to work on it, continue to practice, and then praise God that we live in a world that has autocorrect. We have tools. And so teach
When
them
it's
how
right.
to use tools. Yeah, when it's right. Sarah and I have conversations through text, and we just crack up because
What are you saying?
it likes to change things, and sometimes it changes it after you hit send. And yeah, so that's really fun. So you have to teach them how to use these tools. But be patient. And I will say the most effective approach that I have used with my children that struggled with spelling, I started this with my younger set. I wish I had known with my older set what I know now. I encourage them to ask me how to spell words if they are not sure. I know that's inconvenient for us as moms, but when they can ask us, Mom, how do you spell school? What I would do is, when they were very young, I would do, S, C, H, one letter at a time. And then as they get older, what I do is I stretch that out, and I'll do 2 or 3 letters, and then we go into syllables. So I chunk it up as I give it to them. That increases their memory. And we want them to write it correctly as often as possible, because once they see it wrong and they've worked with it spelled wrong, that's what's in their mind. And so I do not use, with a kid that doesn't spell well, I do not use spelling programs that have the students circle the words that are spelled wrong, because I don't want that in their mind. I don't want them to see those words spelled wrong. Even if they're correcting it, that still can get stuck the wrong way in their minds. And so for those students, I absolutely do not use curriculum that does that. Now, you can use the scrambled letters and have them make sense of it and put it in, or like the word shape that's in language lessons. Those approaches are very helpful. So those are the things that I would say really helped my students the most who struggle with spelling. Just having them not write the word wrong in the first place, and allowing them to ask me. Now, we can use technology if we so choose. So you can say, hey, whatever you're using, how do you spell this word? And they'll repeat it. But I would encourage the mom or the older sibling to be the one to do it, because you really, as they get older, when they get old enough to use that technology, you really want to do it by syllables.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you for answering the question about spelling. The next question is asking about using the resources and the lesson on review days for middle and high school. Is there a point in time where they should not allow open book for review days? And this mom does use those for a test.
I can jump in a little bit too here for my
go ahead.
for my student that's in dual enrollment in his college classes right now, and he is doing like a really deep study into history of civilization, and then he's also doing a, a grammar class, a writing class, his English 102 class. Both of those college level classes, those professors actually still encourage them to use the notes and lessons that they've taken. He's in midterm season this week. One of his professors gave them a list of like, these are all the things I really want you to dig into your textbook and review and write them all out. And then you can bring this to your test. Because that is another way of reinforcement, honestly. So, you know, we may all have different opinions on that one. I'll let Sarah jump in here too. But I will say for my children, I haven't necessarily discouraged that unless it was just something that specifically gave the instruction of don't do it, because it does help them to research and study and reinforce. And if we're being completely honest, we have that as adults in our life. We have the information at our fingertips at all times. We just have to know how to use it and apply it properly. And that helps with that. So I'm seeing even in the college level that they're still doing it and teachers are encouraging it.
Yeah, I would agree. I have a student doing online university, and he has mostly open book, especially when it's a skill-based kind of subject, like math or language arts. So I've allowed my students to use the back of the book. I think sometimes they're lazy and they don't want to look in the book, and they just want to throw down a guess. And they would have learned so much more by using the grammar sheets and the communication sheets and the spelling rules and everything in the back of the book. They could have done so much better, but instead they want to just quickly, jot their answers down, which, just as Kristen said, with, spelling a word wrong, that's reinforced. I think when they're doing a review and they're writing in incorrect answers just to get through quickly because they're not using the back matter, that again is reinforcing the wrong answer. So I would say go ahead and let them use the resources that they need in order to get the correct answers written down on those reviews. If a student would love to be like, how well would I do on this if I had nothing, if I just was trying to remember? That's great too. Maybe you want to do a mix. Every other review, they're allowed to use the back matter. Every other review, they need to thoroughly study exercises 1 through 4. You set a timer. You're going to study for 20 minutes, and then you're going to do your review. That's also great practice too, because there will be tests in college where they don't have access to, information, research sheets, things like that. So I think a mixture is probably a great idea.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I am so willing to admit that, I'll take a look at the back of the brownie mix box and I'll be like, I've got it. And I throw the box away with confidence. You know how many times I have to pull that back out of the garbage? Like, what did it say?
Yeah.
And that's just making brownies. So, and I want my brownies to turn out because I like brownies. And it's so much more important with our students and using those review pages and using open book as they go through it, because that is like having support right next to them as they go to it. They may not need it. They may find that they're not even having to look, but it's there if they do need it. So that's very helpful.
I would like to just add something. I'm with Sarah about the mixture, but how I did that with my students was I would choose subjects. And so let's say science, I wanted them to do closed book. So for that year, I want them to learn how to study for a test, particularly for those college bound students. They do need to know that skill, how to do it, because we don't want them to get to college and then they have no idea how to deal with studying for a test. So you want them to have that practice. But then other subjects for that year, like I wouldn't make them do open book. And I would say language arts lends itself very well to being able to have that open book, to not making them have to do closed book reviews. So if there's another subject that you feel, maybe their history, you want them to memorize more of, say, the timelines and the facts that happen through history, that might be where you're teaching them how to study for a test and a quiz, where language arts really lends itself to being a little bit more loose with that. I don't think we have to study to the test for everything. I would discourage that. It's not the most effective way to educate children for understanding and for adulthood. And I certainly do not want every single time I'm learning something to have to be study to have a test on it. So how often as adults we want to learn something, so we just dive in and learn it. We don't want to have to take a test up for everything. We don't mind having to review the information so that we make sure that we've gotten it, but we don't want to have to take a test, and our kids don't either. So, and this comes from someone, my older kids, they didn't have open book tests. But as we went along, I realized that I was so stuck in that traditional school mindset that it was hard to let that go as the idea of that's how we prove education. Well, that may be how we prove an education, but it's not really a good way to know if your students are retaining something for life versus for this one little moment in time that's quickly forgotten. And so with language arts, really the goal is to sharpen their communication skills, whether it's receiving communication or whether it's writing or speaking.
I'll echo that. 15 years in a classroom, traditional classroom, teaching junior high and high school English. And then I enter the homeschool community with my children. And my older children, I was so traditional and I just could not give up them not taking that test, and especially in language arts, because I was a language arts teacher. But then my younger two got a completely different education because I did realize that and come to that realization myself that it wasn't about just taking that test and studying for that test, which is what I was actually encouraging for them by holding on to that traditional mindset. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I echo that with what I did in my home. And my older two have definitely noticed the difference in
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes they complain,
Yep.
you made me.
Yes.
We're just doing our best. I always tell young moms that every child gets a different mom. My oldest, he got the version of me when I was the new mom and I was learning as I went. And all of my other children, as I've had more along the way, they get a different version of me. They get who I really am at my core, but they get a different level of experience, a different level of flexibility, what I've learned along the way, what I've learned to set down, what I've learned that is not worth my time, or the things that I still am going to die on that mountain for. Every child gets a different mom, and the same is true in homeschooling. We learn a thing or two along the way, and what a blessing to be some of those younger kids in the family, and that's all part of the fun of family dynamics and you didn't let me do this or he did that. But again, it's like I didn't know then and I'm still learning. And our grandkids are really going to get the best of us because all the things that we're going to know at that point will be even better. At least we hope. So as we close out today, I know that we were not able to get to the long list of questions that came through, but that is really an exciting testimony to how many people were so excited to tune in today and who love language lessons, that the series goes all the way from elementary through middle school and high school, and how many people are using it. And just to picture a family, even if it's a large family, that their children are using it for all of those precious years, seeing it build and build as they go along. So we are very thankful for everyone that joined us today. And thank you for submitting your questions. If you did not see your question come through in today's live, we are sorry that we did not have enough time to get to answering it, but your question is very important to us. So we do encourage you to post those questions in the Masterbooks app or in the Moms of Masterbooks Facebook group. I'll have you know our authors are very active in those groups, not just the authors that are sitting with me here today, but a wide variety of Masterbooks authors intentionally connect in our communities because they care about you. They are here to support you in utilizing the curriculum. So if we did not get to your question today, we just invite you to please ask that in the group and get support from not only the authors, but also the community as well. And I do have an announcement to make that if your name is Gina T, you have won the reward point giveaway for today. And if your name is Shannon B, you have won the language lessons level of your choice. So it's very exciting to get to share that while we're still live. Sometimes we don't know who wins until it's all said and done, but today we do. So congratulations to our winners and thank you for joining us today. As we do head out today, I would love to ask each of our authors if they could just share a final encouragement to homeschooling parents that are using language lessons, whether that be a tip, a trick, or just a word of encouragement for a homeschooling mom. So could I have Sarah go first and then Rachel, and then we'll close with Kristen.
Yeah, being that the high school levels are near and dear to my heart, I would just say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of high school language arts. I believe that what we've produced in the high school levels, that it comes alongside a parent in a special way. The rubrics that we've designed to help with essay writing and evaluating, there's just so many helps in there. And I can't stress enough the community, the Masterbooks community. You can ask a question and have so many answers and tips and ideas. And I try and monitor it and make sure that I'm answering questions that parents have. So get on the app, get on the Facebook pages. You have a community out there. Reach out to friends and family who maybe have a background in language arts and they might be willing to evaluate your students' essays. But don't be afraid of high school language arts. It's a lot of fun.
I would jump in and say, and give yourself grace as you're doing it. We are so hard on ourselves as moms. We want them to do so well. And we don't want to fail. We don't want them to fail. And so you definitely have to start new and fresh every day sometimes. I personally, I could give you an account of a language arts struggle today with my student. And where he was so discouraged in himself, and then I was discouraged. I was thinking, oh, I failed him in this area, and I'm a language arts teacher. So give yourself grace and keep pushing forward. Start fresh and new every day. Stop and take a break if needed. As we've already said as well, take advantage of all of the available resources that we have already provided for you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We're here to support and help. So please reach out and use all of the resources we have for you.
I would say that homeschooling is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And when it comes to language arts, your student is going to they're going to work with the concepts repeatedly. It's not about mastery at any particular point. It's about growth. So we want them to grow in their reading ability. We want them to grow in their ability to write. We want them not only to grow in the way that they're expressing themselves, but we also want them to learn how to be listeners, how to receive information in a way that's gracious, and to really honor the other person that is doing the communication to them. And so language arts is a very broad topic, and we are throwing a lot at them. And we don't want to say, oh, you're just never going to learn verbs. Maybe you don't say that directly to the student, but you're saying it in your head. They're never going to learn this. They're never going to learn this. And we feel the weight of those things. They will. They'll get it. It comes just through that constant repetition. And sometimes growth is not in this nice, neat little, like the public school system has set up this expectation. We have kindergarten, first grade, second grade. And we have these I call it the stair step. Every step is a grade level. But that's not really how learning happens. It's very uneven. So sometimes, we'll just be astounded. It just all came so quick. And look at them. They're writing a whole paragraph and they remembered their punctuation. They started their sentences with a capital letter. Who are you, child? And then something that seems really simple, they may really struggle with in language arts, but they're taking off in their math skills.
Mm-hmm.
And we may have a student that is going to their whole life struggle with spelling. And we can be frustrated that they're not getting it. Instead of taking a step back and saying, you know what? God has designed this child in such a way that God's going to receive the glory through what he does. And being a great speller isn't going to impact God's purposes and plans for this student.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to hinder them one bit. It doesn't mean we throw aside spelling, but it's our perspective. It's how we come at it. And just that understanding that it is a process that is spread out over many years. And we don't have to be anxious. We don't have to be frustrated. We can relax as parents and know that over the whole scope of things, they're going to learn what they need to learn and not to get so anxious in the individual day. And I'm guilty of it too. I have to remind myself of all of these things. So we're also like Rachel, we're sprinting towards that finish line with our youngest. And what I've learned over the years with all of my students, no matter how much of the book we did or didn't do, they always go into adulthood learning what they need to know. And if they don't know it, they figure it out. I just had one son, we helped build a resume. And so I was kind of chuckling because we're putting to practice some of the things that we've learned in language arts. And so he's one that struggled in language arts. He's not gifted in it, but he put together a wonderful resume. And so they're going to be okay. Really, they are. So we can relax and trust the Lord to direct their steps, even with language arts.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of the encouragement. And so, moms, we are for you as you are for your child. Help them know how much you love them, that you're on their team, that you're there to help them. That is why we've given up our time to be with our children and to support them in every area, in every subject, that we are with them through it all. And if you've made it through those difficult years, or think back to whatever season you thought, I will never get out of this season. I will be stuck in the potty training world forever. I will be stuck carrying this car seat. This child's never gonna whatever the thing is that you might have thought we'll never get out of. It's amazing. You look back and you're like, oh, we're out of that. And so it's kind of the same with the homeschooling years, where it can be a little bit difficult to just enjoy the season that we're in, especially if it feels like a season of struggle and concern for where they are, what they're doing. But moms, we really are for you. And that's what I love about our Masterbooks communities, that you will find like-minded people who are doing the same thing as you each day, who are walking through the lessons each day with their student, and you will find support there, answers to your questions. You will find confidence. So we invite you there to the Masterbooks app and to the Moms of Masterbooks Facebook group. And we really do thank you for your time today as you've joined Sarah, Kristen, Rachel, and myself as we've been able to answer some of your questions. And we do invite you to please bring any of your unanswered questions into community. Thank you so much for being with us today. We hope you all have a blessed day, and we will see you soon.